If you're like most people, you know how it feels to sleep next to someone who won't stop snoring. You probably become annoyed with that person pretty fast. But what if that person wasn't just simply snoring? What if they were fighting for their life? This may sound a bit dramatic, but if you've ever heard someone making loud choking or sudden gasping sounds in their sleep, it's a little scary, and it's likely this person is suffering from sleep apnea. I'm sure you've heard of sleep apnea, but what you may not know is that this fairly common disorder is strongly associated with arrhythmia, stroke, heart failure, and even sudden death. For people with obstructive sleep apnea, keeping the upper airway open during sleep becomes difficult. Breathing is disrupted or stopped altogether, causing a decrease in blood oxygen and an increase in carbon dioxide. In turn, the body responds by making the heart work harder to pump oxygenated blood to vital organs, stimulating the nervous system to constrict blood vessels and increase the amount of oxygen going to the heart and brain. These chronic breathing disruptions can happen 5 to 30 times an hour or more, usually causing the sleeper to awaken suddenly, gasping for air. Other than interrupted sleep and loud snoring, people tend to think that sleep apnea is a relatively harmless disorder. However, this couldn't be further from the truth. Repeated airway obstruction during sleep contributes to chronic conditions like high blood pressure, stroke, and most often heart disease. Estimates indicate that sleep apnea increases the risk of heart failure by 140% and the risk of coronary artery disease by 30%. Individuals with sleep apnea are 2 to 4 times more likely to experience an irregular heartbeat or arrhythmia while sleeping. Sleep apnea can have a profound and dangerous effect on your heart, and not just long term. You're at a much higher risk of suffering a heart attack and sudden cardiac death as a direct result of untreated sleep apnea, and understanding why is important. Sleep apnea reduces oxygen saturation in your blood because airflow is restricted. Not only does this cause massive oxidative stress in the body, which affects the heart, it's also predictive of sudden death. According to a study published by the Journal of the American College of Cardiology, for every 10% decrease in oxygen saturation, there's a 14% increase in risk of sudden death. Another study reported a 2.5-fold increase in the relative risk of nighttime sudden cardiac death in patients with sleep apnea between midnight and 6 a.m. compared to the general population. The risk increases in proportion with the increasing number of times airflow is restricted, meaning those with severe sleep apnea are at a much higher risk of sudden death. The reduced oxygen saturation that occurs when someone has sleep apnea is also believed to overstimulate the sympathetic nerve system in order to increase airflow. This stimulation causes vasoconstriction of blood vessels and is responsible for the force and rate at which the heart contracts. This sympathetic activation while you're sleeping will cause increased heart rate and force of contraction in an attempt to increase cardiac output to provide the body with oxygenated blood. This overstimulation during sleep is a major contributing factor to cardiovascular events and resulting death. Adding to the studies connecting sleep apnea and sudden cardiac death, a Penn State meta-analysis of 22 observational studies found that obstructive sleep apnea is associated with both cardiac and all-cause sudden death. Specifically, they reported that a person with sleep apnea is twice as likely to experience all-cause sudden death when compared to someone without sleep apnea. Fans of Star Wars may know that actress Carrie Fisher famously died after suffering a heart attack while asleep on a plane. What many don't know is that Fisher suffered severe sleep apnea, which was listed as an immediate cause of death by the chief medical examiner in her autopsy report, along with atherosclerotic heart disease. It's unclear whether or not Fisher was receiving treatment for her sleep apnea. Carrie Fisher is far from alone, as approximately 40,000 cardiovascular deaths occur annually in the United States as a result of sleep apnea, which affects more than 20 million people, with potentially millions more undiagnosed. Many people, including some primary care physicians, are unaware of the serious health complications of obstructive sleep apnea, which is one reason the disorder is so underdiagnosed. This can seem scary if you or a loved one have sleep apnea, but the risk of serious health complications is greatly reduced if the condition is diagnosed and treated properly. A diagnosis of sleep apnea can only be made after a sleep study, called a polysomnogram, confirms you're experiencing breathing problems in your sleep and other complications are ruled out. During a polysomnogram, medical devices are used to measure a person's breathing, heart rate, and the electrical activity of the brain while they sleep. There are some at-home tests available, but a polysomnogram is usually conducted in a sleep lab to achieve a proper diagnosis. If you're diagnosed with sleep apnea, your doctor will explain what type of treatment is appropriate for your situation. The treatment will depend on the severity of the disorder and personal preference. For most people, sleep apnea is a chronic condition. This means that treatment will be lifelong, and stopping will only cause symptoms to come back or even get worse. The good news is, sleep apnea can be managed with a combination of medical treatments and lifestyle changes. The most common and effective way to treat sleep apnea and its underlying conditions is with a CPAP machine. CPAP therapy treats sleep apnea by gently opening obstructed airways with a continuous stream of pressurized air, which allows you to breathe freely and sleep soundly through the night. With CPAP treatment, not only will you sleep better, your heart won't have to work as hard to pump blood through your body. This takes significant stress off of your cardiovascular system. According to one study in the Journal of Clinical Sleep Medicine, CPAP treatment significantly reduced the risk of cardiovascular disease, acute coronary syndrome, and hospitalization for heart failure in patients with sleep apnea and coronary artery disease. This study also showed that CPAP therapy had a significant positive effect on blood pressure, insulin sensitivity, and ventricular function. CPAP therapy is a safe, effective, and accessible treatment for sleep apnea symptoms, but only if you're consistent with your treatment and continue using the CPAP machine. Lifestyle changes in addition to CPAP therapy can also help relieve symptoms of sleep apnea and heart disease. If you haven't done so already, consider losing excess weight that may be putting pressure on airways. Obesity is the most common cause of obstructive sleep apnea. Incorporate 30 minutes of moderate exercise into your day and eat a healthy, well-balanced diet. You should also avoid the consumption of nicotine and alcohol. The link between obstructive sleep apnea and sudden cardiac death is complex, and this is why it's important to check your risk factors and get tested if you suspect you're suffering from sleep apnea. Loud snoring, pauses in breathing while sleeping, being overweight, and family history are all signs that you should get tested. If you think you might have sleep apnea, it's important that you contact a sleep expert as soon as possible. A sleep study, appropriate testing, and proper treatment will make a significant difference in your symptoms and heart health. Hopefully you've found this video informative and helpful. I'll leave links to the studies in the description if you wish to read further. Drop a comment below and share this video with someone you know who may have sleep apnea. Thanks for watching.